All right, thank you very much. So our plenary discussion will have 3 panelists, and I will read their profiles very briefly so that we get started. Mr. Siphosami Malunga is the Executive Director at the Open Society Initiative for Southern Africa, OSISA. OSISA works to promote vibrant and tolerant democracies in Southern Africa. Previously worked in different countries on various assignments for the United Nations, focusing on democratic governance, rule of law, justice sector reform, conflict prevention, post-conflict justice, and peace building. We are also joined by Mr. Morgan Komichi, the Vice President of the MDC Alliance. The Deputy President, Morgan Komichi, believes he was born to fight oppression, misrule, and other forms of dictatorship that go against democratic values. Komichi stole the limelight when ZEC was preparing to announce the July 30 presidential election results, and he stormed the stage during a break. He shouted that ZEC was about to announce fake results. I need a drum roll. He's currently going through a trial for disrupting the trial, as if he was the only person on the stage. He's targeted by the system, because on this occasion he was called onto the stage by the presidential spokesperson, Dr. Nkululeko Sibanda. So I wanted to give you highlights. We've got an action man on the stage. So please pay particular attention. And then we've got a lawyer. He wants to be identified as a lawyer, Mr. Tinomudaishe Chinyoka. He has no profile. He will introduce himself to you through his ideas in this particular session. So I'll hand over to Siphosami. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Delta. I have the misfortune always of having to speak after my brother Bayo. This has happened consistently in every place where I'm placed on a panel or I'm on a podium and Bayo is in the same room and I speak. I always speak after Bayo. I do not know whether this is deliberate. Tendai wrote to me last week and he said, Sipo, here is the agenda. You are speaking after Bayo. I said, okay, so what is going on here? I've come to fancy myself a pseudo-professor of the company I keep, the likes of Bayo. Though I'm just a simple lawyer like Tinomudaishe, maybe simpler than you. I'm supposed to talk about political dialogue, a framework for political transition. I think that's the topic or something like that. I've been quite vocal about the issue of dialogue. I've also been quite vocal about my criticism for the lack of vision that Bayo talked about amongst the political elite on both sides. Zimbabwe finds itself in a moment that is not unusual. We've been here before. There's nothing new about where we are. We just have very short memories. There are people who may argue, because Bayo covered, and yesterday as well, there were a lot of discussions around democracy, what is the ideal political system and culture. But in truth, we have really never been able to construct the society that we desire and need as a country. In 1975, there was a dialogue that collapsed on a railway bridge at the Vic Falls. I was very young at the point, but those of you who remember, and I'm saying this because when you think about this, you can relate to the rhetoric that's going on now. So the dialogue was mediated by Kenneth Kaunda and the South African president at the time. This is what Ian Smith said. on that railway bridge. And he was arguing that he was not going to allow the nationalists to come to the dialogue because they were terrorists. So in that dialogue, all the key nationalist leaders that were leading the nationalist struggle were not there. But the dialogue had started, and Kenneth Kaunda had said with the South African president, let's go and start this dialogue. And they were sitting on a bridge in a railway carriage having this conversation. So Ian Smith said, it was a very acrimonious fallout from that dialogue. It failed dismally. And Ian Smith said, to have these people here, having this discussion, this conversation would involve people who are well-known terrorist leaders, who bear responsibility for the murders and other atrocities which have been perpetrated in this country. This was Ian Smith talking about Joshua Nkomo, talking about Robert Mugabe, talking about all the others. And Mzorewa's response to that was that if Ian Smith cannot go with us on small things like this, and he was talking about giving diplomatic immunity to Joshua Nkomo, to Mugabe, to come to have these talks, because they would have needed immunity, because they were wanted. So Mzorewa says, if Smith cannot go with us on small things like this, we think he cannot be serious. This was Mzorewa, who was at the time leading the African National Council. There was another attempt, a dialogue, 1976, in Geneva. Before that, Kissinger, who was then the American Secretary of State, had come up with a plan which he had sold to the South Africans. And the South Africans had tried to sell their plan to Ian Smith. It had, of course, collapsed spectacularly as well. And then again in Geneva, on the back of trying to build a new constitution, as well as try to create conditions for a ceasefire. And successively, all these talks were failing. But they were all a dialogue aimed at resolving a national crisis, a national question, which was a question around what is the political system that can be inclusive, that can be built, that allows Zimbabweans, the majority of Zimbabweans, to rule themselves. That was a big debate. Yes, there was land, of course, at the head of it, as Bio pointed out. But the question was around a political system that lacked inclusion, where a minority ruled a majority, controlled the levers of economic power, and confined the majority to serving that minority. That was the question of the day. How do we create an inclusive political system and economic system, of course, founded on the desire to redistribute land to the majority? So, 1979, 78, because the dialogue continued, attempts at the dialogue continued, culminating in Lancaster House. And out of Lancaster House, a breakthrough emerged. The dialogue resulted in an agreement, which was that constitution of Lancaster House. And then transitional arrangements to facilitate the implementation of that agreement. Firstly, elections, and then the outcome of elections, then determining the future of the country. But of course, because there were many interests at the time, whatever agreement came out had to cater for those interests and manage those interests very carefully. That's why we had the 10-year clauses, sunset clauses, the protection, the ring fencing of all the other things, including those 20 seats that were given to white people. Because they had the consequence of the outcome of that agreement had to be accommodative. I will speak later about what are the key elements of an inclusive participatory political dialogue. But I just wanted to say that we are not in any new place here. 1987. So we all know that in 1980 a new political crisis emerged immediately. It was going to happen. It was inevitable. I know people almost think sometimes that, hey, Mugabe decided, okay, I'm going to do this. What happened, if you think carefully about many things, a lot of things that happened were almost inevitable. It was almost like the die was cast. It was going to happen in any way, no matter what. So, in 1980, a new crisis emerges, a new political. Literally, you have ZIPRA, supported by Russia, one of the only two superpowers at the time. Because people tend to forget that China was not a superpower, and Zanla were trained in China, a lot of them. Joshua Nkomo's ZIPRA was one of the most powerful guerrilla armies in the late 70s, 1980. Mugabe had every reason to be afraid. They could topple him in a half should the military option have been chosen. Of course, we are not going to discount the other elements that played into it, the tribal elements, the ethnic elements, and so on. But the reality is that the die was cast. So in a quest for one-party state, you have this very powerful figure who has led the nationalist struggle, who has been considered by the world possibly as the person who is supposed to lead this country into independence. How do you contend with this? So that's why I always say the die was cast. It need not have led to Kukurahundi, but it did. So 1980 all the way, Kukurahundi, Mtumbane, Kukurahundi, all the way to 1987. Many efforts at dialogue until 1987, where the unity agreement was signed. Many will say where ZAPU capitulated under immense pressure. I wish they had capitulated before 20,000 people were killed. But of course, the logic is, at the end of the day, somebody had to capitulate. But there was dialogue again. And that dialogue led to the resolution of the question of the day. How do we stop an internal crisis, political crisis, which had culminated into atrocities against innocent civilians by the government? But the problem was also highly political. How do we consolidate political power? How do we, and this was of course from the perspective of Zanla and ZANU, how do we consolidate our authority? How do we stop this? How do we manage control? And it culminated in 1987 with ZANU PF, Mugabe in charge, a new executive presidency, the consolidation of political power and authority in the country. It stops instantly the crisis. It stops the killings. It stops the violations. And then we move on. We forget that we ever had a crisis. So, fast forward 2008, we again have a political crisis. Again, a contestation of power. Who has won? Who has won this election? Morgan claims victory. Mugabe admitted it one day that Morgan won by 75%. But those that have it are not ready to give it up. We have another political crisis. How is it resolved? Once again, by dialogue. He was one of the principals who signed that agreement. Why am I talking about all this? Might it be that political settlement is the default in our country? I know that we have this whole election, election sense of someone must win, someone must lose. We've already discarded its inadequacies. We understand it. Even some of us who do believe in democracy, we understand that it is imperfect. Because when you win big. When you lose big. You win the whole cake and you lose the whole cake. The level of contestation is way too disproportionate. So, are the political systems that we are desiring to create through these models of governance, the democracy model, are they the best way?
for us to ensure everyone is included. Because we have to think about this. We know what an election is. And there are different models. Proportional representation, first past the post, mixed member. There's all sorts of ways in which you can re-engineer society on an election basis. But we know what happened here and in many other countries. Because elections are the only way to legitimize political power, they become the center of contestation. The stakes are way too high. We also know that in our states that are hollowed out, where the only way to access economic opportunity is via the state, it becomes a do or die. No one is willing to lose an election. So we know now that in history in our country, we have always sought accommodation politically in one way or another, whether after killing each other, well, always after killing each other. We have still come back to the table and said, okay, let's talk. You'll be prime minister, I'll be president. You'll be vice president, I'll be president. Well, only one person has always been president. But it's okay. What it tells us, perhaps there's something wrong with our political system, which we need to rethink. There is no point in having any dialogue, a political dialogue. I've said this in some of my posts. There is no point if you are not open to a reconfiguration and redistribution of power. Meaningful political dialogue must really result in redistribution of power. And in many instances, it has to some extent, a very limited extent. Unfortunately, in the past, what we now know is that some of those dialogues have never really meant, have been never meant to redistribute power. They have, in many instances, meant to regroup, to re-strategize, to rethink, to reorganize. So here we are now, talking again about dialogue. Some have said, anytime, I'm ready. And when President Mnangagwa wants to talk to me, he knows where to find me. We've heard that. We've also heard President Mnangagwa say, no, we must have a dialogue. We need to talk, we need to resolve our problems. So everybody seems to agree that there has to be a dialogue. But everybody wants dialogue on their own terms. In reality, we must also contend with another fact, that there are serious threats to any political conversation or any dialogue in the country. What are those threats as we speak? There are serious power struggles in each of the key political movements as we speak. There are power struggles that may totally decimate or destroy these political movements. Nobody may want to talk about it. We may pretend they don't exist. But we know what is going on. The dialogue that we would be having now is not the same dialogue that Mugabe was having with Joshua Nkomo. Mugabe was in full control of ZANU-PF when he had a dialogue with Joshua Nkomo. Mugabe was in full control of ZANU-PF when he was having a dialogue with Morgan Tsvangirai in 2008. So we must look at the context in which these conversations are happening. Post-November, and it's a fact, because it would have been impossible to consolidate ZANU-PF as a party between November and July. It takes longer. This is a party that had been riven by serious divisions anyway. There hasn't been the opportunity for that political consolidation of the ruling party. So we must understand this. So even the consensus around dialogue, around the necessity for the party to survive, is tainted by individual interest in there who might be maneuvering in different directions, who might themselves be threatened by the dialogue. And they are a threat to the dialogue. Why am I saying this? We cannot assume that there is consensus within the ruling party around the necessity for political engagement and dialogue. We cannot. Because there are people who are likely to lose out from that. Because if dialogue is genuine, resulting in a configuration of power and redistribution of same, it means that somebody must be accommodated and somebody at the top must give way. And this is not a palatable position. We must never lose sight of this. Let's go to opposition. It's the same thing. The opposition, the main opposition alliance, is a creature that was formed barely a year or so before the election. It is in the process of being constituted. It had broken up into small pieces and one large piece that remained. Now the pieces have come together for the purpose of contesting the election, quite successfully in fact, garnering a very significant showing in those elections, but it is not consolidated as a political party. It is PDP, MDC, Ngube, and so on, but it's an alliance, but it's not a party. Of course, we've seen very significant moves to consolidate that. That's a threat to the movement. Is there cohesion? Is there consensus in this movement around the necessity for a new political system? What is the authority that is given and who is the person that is being charged to go and lead this conversation? How can people be assured? Because in a political movement, when you start dialogue, you must commit. What is the level of commitment? What is the commitment? So we have to understand that as a threat. So these are the struggles within these political movements. And we have to think, how are they overcome? It's not Joshua Nkomo leading ZAPU saying, and Joshua Nkomo, for all his, bless him, he was also in some ways in total control of his party. I know Umtala, whenever he said this happens, nobody could ever say this doesn't happen. He was in full control. He said, we're now talking. Everyone would say, this is William Mtala. There would be robust debate, but when Mtala decided to take out his stick and say, this happened. Similar with Robert Mugabe. This is not the case here now, either in ZANU-PF as the main or in the MDC. We also have spoilers. I talked about spoilers. And these spoilers are at many different levels. So some of the spoilers are economic predatory elites who stand to lose a lot from any conversation that reconfigures access to economic opportunity in this country. Because we all know that access to economic opportunity is derived from access to political opportunity here. So to reconfigure political power and opportunity is to reconfigure economic opportunity. We know that. So for you to start tinkering with that, you have a serious problem. So these are some of the spoilers we have. Some of these spoilers have guns. They control armories. Another threat is the possibility of an elite pact. A pact between the key political formations in the country, MDC and ZANU-PF. This is a serious threat from this dialogue. Because the problems of Zimbabwe are not MDC and ZANU-PF. They go further than that. There's a whole range of issues that need to be resolved in terms of the national question. I've always said, and some people don't like it when I say it, there's the Matabeleland question. It's unresolved. It remains unresolved. It should be part of the dialogue. There's the question around women and their place in society in Zimbabwe. We've seen a huge regression in both of these political formations and movements in terms of women as participants, equal participants in the political and economic space. That has to be part of the dialogue. And there's many more other issues. We've seen the issue of the capture of the economy and the capture of everything else economic by a small predatory elite that literally takes everything and eats it whenever they get the chance. That has to be part of the dialogue. The reform of the security sector has to be part of the dialogue. The military has to be totally removed from politics and from the civil service. I'll go quickly, I have 5 minutes. Of course, there's other threats, lack of trust, and that's the biggest problem. There's no trust. There's no trust at all between the key protagonists. Violence, the continued use of violence at the hands of the state. We know that even with the Smith and the nationalists, every time discussions broke down, the liberation struggle intensified. And that, of course, is a vicious cycle, right? So it makes it even harder to talk again. But you must continue to talk, regardless. What are the key elements? I'll rush through them. Of an inclusive participatory dialogue. I've said many times that I do not believe a dialogue should just be about accommodation between ZANU-PF and MDC. That is not what this country needs. What is our vision for our country? What kind of political system do we want? What kind of political culture do we want? The cultural issues will take time, but we need to vision it out. What kind of political culture do we desire? And all these things need to be sketched, and there has to be a common vision, a common national interest, that we all agree. We are committing ourselves to resolving this issue. What is the issue? So that's the first thing. That's the first element of a national political dialogue. A commitment to resolve the issue, the national question. What is that national question? The second is that you need facilitation of the dialogue. I've seen, of course, invitations. The president has invited people to State House. Then the churches have started their own thing. The reality is that a dialogue is a conversation between two opposing parties. It needs facilitation. You cannot facilitate your own dialogue, of which you are a party. It's a fact. You can engage in talks. You can open up the avenues. There's no problem with all that. You can test the waters. You can build confidence. So there's nothing wrong with inviting people, just talk. Nobody's even questioning that. But a meaningful dialogue needs facilitation. Whether it's external, as in someone from outside, or someone from inside who has the confidence and trust of all the parties, it really doesn't matter. A dialogue requires the setting of an agenda. What is the agenda for the dialogue? What are we talking about? Are we talking about everything? Are we talking about some things? Are we talking about July 30? Are we talking about legitimacy? Are we talking about where the country is going? Are we talking about, what are we talking about? Might we need to change the constitution again? Might we need to change the way power is shared and governed, and people are governed in this country? How do we create a more inclusive political system? And this is where scholars need to be thinking and making those suggestions about what should be in the dialogue. The fourth is we need to agree on who's supposed to be in that room. Who are the participants? I totally disagree with the idea of the three principals. I know one principal is here in the room with us. But that's a different conversation around the politics, but that's not the only people that need to be in a room on a national dialogue. For goodness sake, we've been suffering for 40 years. We all have something to say. We all want to say something about this, about what we want, the country we want, the vision we want. And it need not be political. It could really just be about, you know what, this is the country I want for my own children. This is how I want to be involved in the governance of my country. I want to be consulted now and again. The fifth point is that a meaningful dialogue needs a framework, a governance framework. What is the framework for the dialogue? Is there going to be a committee? Is there going to be somebody appointed? Is there going to be a council? It cannot, if it's going to be meaningful and consistent, be ad hoc. The sixth is that the public must be involved. The public must own. The public must buy into the process. Because this dialogue essentially and effectively is theirs. And when we say public, we're not talking about ZANU supporters or MDC supporters. The public may include those people, but the way people identify themselves goes beyond the political party affiliations. When we say public, we mean people, with or without political affiliations. They have to support the process and buy into it. Logistics. Where is this dialogue? How is it happening? What are the resources required to sustain it? Colleagues who followed the comprehensive peace agreement in Sudan will remember that at some point, Garang and others, when they were talking to Bashir, they were put in some nice fancy hotel, I think it was in Uganda, and the dialogue was not ending, because you know when you're in a nice hotel, you know, why should you end? The dialogue was not ending, because no, we don't agree. Then they go another week, drinking, enjoying, another month, until someone said, no, get these people from here. Put them in some dingy place far away from here. They will agree very quickly. This is just a point on logistics, right? So it's also important that the dialogue is supported in the logistics. Of course, Arthur knows, because they were shuttling between Westcliff and all these places, and of course, Shabampofu, wherever these dialogues were being hosted by Mbeki, here as well. But all these things need to be thought through. External assistance, whether it's the AU, local churches, CSOs, SADC, UN, it's an important element of a dialogue. And finally, an agreement on outcomes. In closing, I want to quote just one. Unfortunately, he's not African, so I feel I'm betraying. But he's a revolutionary nevertheless. Gramsci said one time, writing from prison. You're asking if I know Gramsci. I see Comrade Marx there, Karl Marx. He doesn't know I read Gramsci. I'm a pseudo professor also. But Gramsci was more of a revolutionary than a white man. So Gramsci said, the crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. In this interregnum, a great variety of morbid symptoms appear. This is Zimbabwe now. Thank you.
Thank you for concluding on such a scholarly note. Right, I'm not going to summarize. He just gave us the points that he felt we should zero in on. So I'm going to invite Mr. Morgan Komichi to take us on. And I'm hoping that somewhere in his presentation, he will speak to whether or not he feels there is sufficient political will amongst the political actors to actually engage in a dialogue. And maybe comment on whether the moderates within these political parties have any influence at all, because every party has got its hardliners, you know, the extremists, those who are happy to let it all burn. And then you have got the moderates who tend to also be taken as sellouts. Why do you want to consider sitting down with the enemy? So I'm really interested in the dynamics from, you know, an intra-party perspective, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Facilitator. I would like to start by thanking the Institute for establishing such a platform.
Oh, sorry, Mike.
I would like to start by thanking the Institute for establishing such kind of a platform where such big ideas are being shared. I also want to appreciate that we are one of the consumers of the data that is being shared here. I believe we'll be able to make use of it. I think it will improve us as well. And the country will benefit out of this effort. Thank you so much. I'd like to start by removing some of the doubts and the fear which the last presenter has just given out, that Nelson Chamisa is fully in charge of MDC Alliance. Fully in charge.
the National Standing Committee that he heads totally agrees on the need to solve the Zimbabwean challenge. Totally agrees. I'm not sure whether our friends in the Shek building are in the same situation. But with us, we're quite comfortable with ourselves and what's happening there. Most of the theoretical background has been covered by Honorable Malunga. He has covered quite some theoretical background, otherwise I'll be repeating them. I will not try to repeat those things, but let me just pick up some of the points which I would want to sort of repeat and agree with him. That political dialogues have been taking place from time back. He has already outlined them. The GPA, the Unit Accord, the Longest House Agreement, and many others. The question that I've asked is that, what were they trying to achieve? And have we achieved what they intended to come out with? One of the major elements that he has raised was the one woman, one vote. That is one of the things why we went to war. The strong belief that drove the war. The Zanla force and Zipra forces died for that. And if you go back to 1980, it was practiced. I was almost 18 years by that time, and I voted. The question is the principle still being followed? Are we still following that key value of one woman, one man, one vote? Many people will say no, but a few will say yes. Is they right? We've been trying to achieve economic growth, peace, freedoms, national healing. Are these things achieved by now? After so many political party dialogues. So the question is, if they have not been achieved, because I'm quite sure by statistics majority would say no, because from the research that was done by CVO, shown yesterday, majority of the people had doubts. Only I think 3 or so, 2% were happy with what's happening. Majority were not happy. The question is, why are we embarking on programs which do not achieve the intended results? The question is, what is missing in this process? Are we doing the right thing? Because it's not only Zimbabwe, the world over. Political leaders have sat down in Sudan, in Somalia, all over the world, DRC, but the outcomes have never been of anything to celebrate about. Just go out a bit. When I wrote my dissertation on peace, leadership, and conflict resolution, my supervisor says, "What is this?" When I said, election is a peace spoiler, in the case of Zimbabwe. We argued with the supervisor for a long time, but I said, let me write first. When I write, then you can criticize me. I wrote, and he was very happy thereafter. Because elections in Zimbabwe, they've been used to oppress people, which is not their intended goal. After every time we go to an election, there's an effort to have a political dialogue. Usually what we have seen is that the government would want to use the political dialogue for them to achieve legitimacy. While the opposition political parties and the citizens would want to have life improved. They would like to have peace. They would like to have economic growth. So because of the two positions, they tend to sit down. Therefore, they start talking. I see some of the challenges that are associated with this kind of a process. I don't see frankness in this process. I don't see sincerity in this process. That is why we don't achieve our intended goals. Political parties meet for certain agendas. In the case of Zimbabwe, there's no genuinity in the whole process. There's no genuine dialogue that has ever been taken in Zimbabwe. And remember, the Unit Accord was all about one-party state. It had nothing to do with actually improving the lives of the people. The ultimate goal was to establish a one-party state, which I still remember Professor Mtambara and his team fought very hard against it. Thank you so much, with the help of Edgar Tekere and others. Thank you very much for that. You fought very hard, you fought very hard against that. But that was the main objective of the ZANU agenda, the Unit Accord. They did not want any other political party to exist in Zimbabwe. So you can see their main agenda was one-party state. It had nothing to do with the people's issues. The people's issues were actually a byproduct. The main agenda was. But anyway, coming back to our situation, do we need a dialogue? And what for? The question that I want to ask is that, are we experiencing any crisis in Zimbabwe? Some will say yes. Then you're going to ask, what are the crises that are there in Zimbabwe? Some will point out that there's legitimacy crisis in Zimbabwe. There is a governance crisis in Zimbabwe. Leadership crisis, economic crisis, and political crisis are experienced in Zimbabwe. So, therefore, we need, as Zimbabweans, we need to sit down and deal with these issues. We need to rescue our people from the pain that they're going through. So we must deal with these issues. Whether you like or not, legitimate crisis is there. It cannot be conferred by the court. It can't be conferred by ZEC. Yes, of course, it must be conferred by the people. What you went through Concord was a legal process, but it's got nothing to do with the legitimate people's acceptance of the current governance that is there. So we need to talk about this. This can be resolved around the table, not by political parties alone. I totally agree with you. One of the weaknesses of the GPA, which I had actually looked at, was that the GPA was an elite pact of Comrade Mtambara, Comrade Changirai, and Robert Mugabe. It excluded the masses. I experienced this soon after the 2013 elections, when I tried to interact with the civil society, the churches, and all others. They expressed their pain. And I apologized to most of the organizations that I met. I said, sorry. The next time we're going to meet over the same agenda again, the citizens will be involved. The citizens would play a great part in the process in the next dialogue. Yes, of course, the questions of the frameworks of how to structure that is what you guys would work on, what you should come out with. But we need the involvement of every key sector of our society, involvement of all key stakeholders, such as business community, churches, women, youth, and many others. They must be involved in the process, because the problem in Zimbabwe is actually beyond political warfare that we experience. We need to resolve the Zimbabwean issues. We need to deal with that. We also want to appreciate that the leadership in my party would definitely want to kickstart the dialogue. But it must be a serious one. a genuine dialogue, a sincere process that will resolve the Zimbabwean challenge once and for all. We can't continue to be in dialogues where only just a small elite will benefit at the expense of the entire community and the citizens. We can't agree on that. We don't want such kind of dialogues. We need comprehensive dialogues where people are going to benefit once and for all. We must be able to participate in a dialogue that will be unique compared to any other dialogues that have been happening before. We must be involved in that. Yes, of course, where bulls fight, you know what they do. Some of the bulls will be bellowing and so forth. That's the process of dialogue that will be taking place. So let us make sure that it's no eater. We have looked at other things that we would want you guys to start discussing and share with us and help us where we need to do. We need to make sure that we deal with the challenge of legitimacy in this current as the number one item. The challenge of legitimacy in the country. Because Zimbabwe is not legitimate inside and outside Zimbabwe. We need to deal with that. We want to make sure that is one of the issues that's going to be talked about. We need also to deal with the comprehensive reforms. Security sector reform has been mentioned. It's one of the key issues. In my view, all other crises that I've mentioned are not an issue. The issue is who holds the power in Zimbabwe. And in my view, the power resides in the military. They're the one that's in charge. So one of the challenges why the previous dialogues have never produced anything sensible, it is because Wamtambara, you were negotiating with Mugabe. We had no real power. You set over the dialogue issue in the table, but the actual men and women, that is the decision to make all the people that were supposed to deal with their interests, needs, and fear were supposed to be the military. So Zimbabwe must actually identify the real problem. The reason why people have gone to elections and voted for whatever they want, and at the end of the day they cannot have power transfer, is because the people that is with the power to decide are behind the people that you talk to. If you remember very well the 2008 elections, the 2002 elections, the 2014 elections, the military had a say. Now Zimbabwe is actually now a military state. Make a small mistake on the street, they're up in arms with you. It's now a fully fledged military state. And we need to deal with that. We need to talk to them. We need to negotiate these issues. And Zimbabweans must actually be prepared to negotiate on that one. Another item that we also need to do is, my friend Malunga was talking about the national question. It's true, because Zimbabwe is not a nation at all. Zimbabwe is split in various regional countries. They are the Karangas, the Zulus, the Ndebeles. We're not a nation, because we've got issues at heart which need to be dealt with. The Kukura issues, Murapachuna issues, violence of everything like that. We need to deal with those issues so that we build a nation. And we deal with national healing. We also need to take responsibility as Zimbabweans to have our own comprehensive economic rescue package to deal with the issues that are affecting our country. We need to deal with our issues, and I know if we put the Zimbabwean brains together, they will be able to come out with a very comprehensive, effective economic rescue package, which, when it is actually agreed, we'll be able now to move as a team or as a family to go and sell it international, to open up in what we call international engagement, which so far I've seen my brother Emerson has tried to travel all over the world, and nothing is coming. But if we have these five issues that I've raised, we'll be able to take them as a package and resolve our country's challenges. These 5 key points that I've raised are able to deal with issues of legitimacy, issues of governance, challenges of economic crisis, and challenges of leadership crisis. They can be resolved by the 5-point plan. However, it is not a cast in stone. You are invited to improve on it, to add, so that at least you can solve our Zimbabwean challenge. We need to be genuine as leaders. I take your word, Professor Mutambara, that we must provide leadership, we must be statesmen, we must be genuine, and must be able to tackle the problems so that at least at the end of the day, we have a great country. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Komichi. I found it interesting that you hinted at the fact that sometimes the people who are sitting at these negotiation tables are not even the wielders of actual power. So I wonder if there should be an extra chair at the next set of dialogue. You know, the next time you attempt a dialogue, should we have extra seats for these people that we believe to be the real wielders of actual power? I'll then invite Tino to please take us on.
Thank you. Please bear with me 30 seconds. I think my voice carries enough for everybody to hear. I have a reputation of carrying bags, which has created memes on. Is that what I would say? Memes. Meme. You see, this is what you get when you get people from Berengwa to get to Harare. They then massacre this adopted language that people get. But yes, there are memes of me carrying bags on social media. So I couldn't disappoint my young brother when he asked me to come and speak. I wanted to bring a bag. But before we get to the contents of my bag, let me make one thing very clear. I am Tinomdaesh Nyoka. I do not speak for ZANU-PF. I do not speak for Emmerson Mnangagwa. But I absolutely voted for ZANU-PF, and I absolutely voted for Emmerson Mnangagwa. Let's be very clear on that. Now, I had a well-prepared presentation, it even PowerPoint, keynote thing. I was going to email it to the people, but when I showed it to the person in charge of me, every page was censored except the first page. So I was left without a presentation. This person is very powerful, and she expects a report when we finish here. I know some of you might have thought that the person in charge was somebody who, one of these phantom people who are really in charge of this country. So this is what I am here to say. I'm going to talk about dialogue and the reason why me and other people who probably voted like me for the same people I voted for think that everything you have just heard from my brother here is completely, I won't use the word I was going to use. Here is the thing. It is very easy to create narratives. And it doesn't follow that if a narrative becomes popular, it is a true narrative. I'll give you an example of a narrative that is created. There is a meme of us, I was supposed to introduce myself. I'm a lawyer. I'm one of the lawyers who represented the president at his constitutional petition, the one that Chamisa filed, the one that Chamisa lost, the one that Mnangagwa won, and which is case number ZCC 43 of 2018. In this thing is not working, but you can all hear me, yes? It's not, okay, is it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, in this capacity, on a Sunday, we carried bags full of bricks and bond paper to the court, pretend that we wanted to file papers on a Sunday. Everybody made fun of us on social media, that these people are stupid, file papers on an uncourt day, they don't know what they are doing. Why did we do this? Because we wanted to create a narrative. Jonathan Moyo was getting carried away talking about points in the case, which would have clouded people's views about the case. In Europe, where they have juries, it's called poisoning the jury. Jonathan Moyo and his people were poisoning the people to telling them what are the issues. We wanted people to talk about something else. It was easier for people to talk about how stupid we were because we knew what we were doing. But there's a narrative, yes? There's a narrative that has been created in this country about a legitimacy crisis. A legitimacy crisis manufactured on the fact that, as Komichi just said, that the people voted, but the power wasn't transferred. The people of Zimbabwe voted for Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. Nelson Chamisa went to court and filed these papers. This is Chamisa's petition. Every document here, these are his papers. There was absolutely nothing in these papers that would have won a case in the Constitutional Court. You could have imported the entire United States Supreme Court judges to come and hear this petition. He would have lost. The reason why he would have lost is that there was no basis for challenging the fact that Emerson Mnangagwa won the election. I will tell you the highlights of the legitimacy points around the election. The major point raised was that the figures announced by ZEC differed from the figures announced by ZBC reporters during the day of the election. Because these reporters were allegedly saying, here in Mashonaland West, people have voted, so far 30,000 people have voted, so far 109,000 people voted, around 3. Now, I ask you this, we as a nation, let's not be selective in how we interpret and consume news. The MDC does not believe ZBC. But for some reason, they want to believe ZBC when they announce at 3 o'clock in the afternoon that 109 people had voted. And they made copious pages of how this was a fact. Second fact that they relied on, the most important one, where you also, those figures that showed different differences or similarities in different places. That was based on a report prepared by a professor who fortunately is an African, but unfortunately is not an expert on elections. This is a professor whose thesis is based on migration habits of fish and birds in Mexico and in the Indian Ocean, who happens to be a friend of someone who was in the election team of Odinga, who then asked him to do a report for that Kenyan election, and on the basis of that report, he convinced the MDC that he was an expert on elections. If you read the Odinga judgment in Kenya, more than 300 pages of that judgment, the professor is mentioned on page 243 in a footnote that there was also a report from this guy. This is the guy who sent a report to the MDC saying there is dissonance in the results which can only be explained through rigging. What is the dissonance? He looked at Muzhezwe constituency. We are Zimbabweans. He isn't. He does not know Muzhezwe. We do. Muzhezwe constituency takes Kadoma, bits of Kadoma, and bits of farms that were given to people in the land resettlement program. He then looks at one ward in Muzhezwe constituency where Chamisa had 143 votes and Mnangagwa had 2. And he looks at the next one. So this is ward 13 or 12. He looks at the next numerical number, not adjacent, but the next numerical number. He has no idea that these wards are not in the same place. In that ward, Mnangagwa has 245. Chamisa has 8. And he says, it can't. Because these people live in the same district. How can they have views that are so different? Well, hello. The first word you looked at is from Rimuka, or the outskirts of Rimuka. These are town people. The other one is people who were given farms by a government where they know that the other guy is saying this was illegal, giving them farms. Why is this dissonance? He doesn't know, he doesn't explain. So these are the things that you are hearing that, oh, we won an election because of this. The MDC says ZBC was unfair to them. These papers, several pages of how ZBC was unfair to them. They didn't report about this, they didn't report about that. 2 letters from ZBC in reply to this allegation. 1 letter from ZBC to the MDC to say, we are offering political parties time. Some of it you pay, some of it you don't. The one that you pay, tell us when you want to buy it. The one you don't pay, give us your schedule of what the activities you are doing, and we will arrange people to cover you. Reply from MDC. We are not at the moment interested in taking up this offer. When we are, we will get in touch with you. What do? There is no legitimacy crisis because Chamisa lost. The problem is this, and this is where we come to the dialogue. If you then say your precondition to dialogue is that you want to deal with talking to people who are as convinced as I am that there is nothing to talk about. If we still need to talk to you about accepting the result of this loss, we probably need to bring in medical intervention. This is, no. I am saying this is the mindset of the people you are talking to, that people are very sure that there is nothing, no question about this election, none at all. All the allegations about Supreme Court is bought, Constitutional Court is bought, people, he lost. These are the papers. There is no legitimacy crisis in this country. Yes, we have an economic problem, but one of the things that the MDC does not do is to accept responsibility for contributing to this economic crisis. Now, I'm not going to talk about sanctions, although I should say that when in 2017, when members of the MDC went with members of civic society to Washington, D.C., and conversations were made by the political component about sanctions, that did not and does not reflect well on civic society. It might help in future that we avoid commingling our trips, because you then come across a civic society is campaigning for sanctions. Because when these politicians travel, please their constituency, which might not necessarily look very well when you make common purpose with them. But there is a policy called Kudirajecha. Let's not pretend that it's not there. Now, if Kudirajecha is not working, why do we have it? And if it's working, why do we not accept its results? That it's working to contribute to the economic problem. Therefore, that's an issue we should be talking about. Not an issue you create in order to justify dialogue. To say, oh, we have an economic crisis, so we can go around and do this because we need to resolve the political crisis. When you are dealing with people that will come to fora like my brother Sipo Malunga, he laughed at me at USET when I said to him I wanted to run for president of the Students' Union. And I was second year, he was third year, so maybe they wanted to go first. But anyway, so I've not, we have not been friends since that time. But anyway, when Sipo talks to about professors who when they are here, they tell you that they were in the room when Thabo Mbeki said something which is in a book. Yeah? When you listen to people like Professor Mtambara, Professor Gwisai, and they are at a meeting like this one, you don't come here and say, Chamisa is fully in charge of the MDC. I don't know about my friends in Shake Shake building. They might have problems. First of all, the friends in Shake Shake building can point to a Congress and a resolution of that Congress appointing Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa as president of ZANU-PF. The nearest that Chamisa can point to anything is the purported dying wishes of a dearly departed person that should be in charge. No Congress, no resolution, but we are told, I don't know about those. Let's not insult people's intelligence. Let's not go around creating phantom issues when what we know is that the only issue that the MDC is interested in about this dialogue is transfer of power from ZANU-PF, who won an election, to them on the basis of phantom figures of 2.6 million. The same people who sent copious papers to the Constitutional Court saying these numbers are too many, not that many people voted. Then want to come around and say, I got 2.6 million votes. From where, if not many people voted? He says it everywhere. Mnangagwa should go 2 years, then I come and do 2 years. We have heard him. That is what they want. That is the dialogue. Let's not come here to fora like this and pretend that we are neat, clean people asking for something reasonable. The examples that my brother here, I'm very sorry to criticize you or to disagree with you, not criticize, disagree. Rhodesia, Somalia, DRC, Sudan, very different. War situations. People are fighting. Of course, you have to talk. Everywhere where there is a war, eventually people sit down and talk. Zimbabwe, no war, no dissidents. Just a guy who lost an election and had some people mischievously phone him and tell him about the existence of an existent server on the 16th floor of Reserve Bank building, where there isn't one, and told him that you have 2.6 million on that thing. Very different. So yes, let's listen to these examples of what Smith said, what Mzorewa said. Let's listen to all. What we all know is that, for example, I'm a lawyer, so I will give you a legal example. If you read a court judgment, no matter how many pages, there are some very good things that judges will say. But in the law, these things will be called obvious. They have nothing to do with the case that talked about. They might be interesting points, but they are necessary for something else. Rhodesia, DRC, Sudan, Somalia, yes, those are good things. They have absolutely zilch to do with Zimbabwe, because we had an election that some guy lost. We, more than 2,000 years ago, somebody wrote something which I'm going to try and remember, where he is writing this to his lawyer. He says, my lawsuit has nothing to, my lawsuit is about 3 goats which my neighbor stole. The judge wants this proved. But you, with extravagant gestures, wax lyrical about the Mithridatic wars, perjury of the Carthaginians, and the perjury of the Canaan and the Miri. It is time, Postmaster, to say something about my 3 goats. It is time for the MDC to say something about this country, about Zimbabwe, about the people of this country. That dialogue about how we get bread on the shelves, about how we stop hemorrhaging money because people are not sure of what is going on, bring in investment if we need it, about how we tackle, were presented by my brother yesterday, the 3 major issues, the 3 major corruption, mismanagement, about how we tackle those things. That's what we need to talk about. That dialogue, let's have it. This one, about a boy who lost people. Come on. He lost.
Okay. There's There's this phrase that I like to say, you know. I say that my version of reality is not the only valid one, which is to say, I'm always open to the possibility that I could be wrong. But I feel like in many instances, if you can just find that one, you know, common goal, hashtag putting Zimbabwe first. So from the presentations we've had, there's a very clear, Namwari. I think I'll take 3 questions from the floor, just 3, let them be questions, please, so that we can move quickly to the next panel. Yes, there's a hand right there, second one there, the last one there. Okay, let them be questions, please.
Yeah, thanks to the speakers. I'm not a Zimbabwean, so my knowledge of this country is pretty general, although I'm very interested in Zimbabwe. It's to the last speaker who made a very good lawyer's presentation of the ZANU-PF case. I'm a lawyer myself by training, but it's not, my question is on a legal one. The issue of power. A government wins an election, which is important, is constitutionally valid. But from listening to the discussions in the room yesterday and today, it seems to me that there's a mood in the country. And from the little that I followed, in terms of even how the president came to be removed in a coup that was not a coup, there's a mood in the country, which seems to me that there's an interest in society beyond MDC, ZANU, about how to build a new mood of national unity and confidence to deal with national problems. I take the example of my own country, Ghana, where we have not been on the brink of war, but there have been moments of tension where there have been dialogue. So the issue of ruling parties have legitimacy through formal processes, but there cannot be a mood that undermines a popular thing. So I'm just wondering whether it is only in the issue is only between the two parties, or he sees that in the issues he raised about corruption and so on as a country coming together, does he see the possibility of a dialogue involving more than the two main parties, where the country can try to rebuild a certain sense of a common purpose?
Okay, thank you for the presentations. And I want to say, I think at the end of the day, it's nice to say we are all Zimbabweans, and Zimbabwe actually is still there. I said Yanyura, and we are there as Zimbabweans. We'll make sure one day we'll be laughing back at whatever is happening now. But I want to ask you, Sipho, your experiences, if at all you can share with us, the so-called success or success story, and let me not say so-called, I've never been to Rwanda myself. How did they do it? It seems it's a success story. They were in a situation where we also saw them carrying beds, running away. But it seems now they seem to be at peace. I've never been to Rwanda. I've just read about it. What happened? And what can we learn from that situation so that we can use it to have something out of our situation in Zimbabwe? Thank you.
Thank you. My question, actually, I wanted to comment first to Tino, but since you have asked the questions, I will just ask the question. But to Sivo, my question is in relation to what I said yesterday, that I believe in a comprehensive national dialogue, and I believe that we need to involve citizens. So as you have said also that the dialogue should be multi-stakeholder dialogue,
and should be comprehensive to include several stakeholders. The key question is, at what level are we supposed to involve the citizens? Should we wait until the political dialogue starts, then we engage the citizens, or we have to start and engage the citizens to inform the political and the economic or other sectoral dialogues? Thank you.
One last question from Dr. Morisa.
Yeah, so this one is for both Senator Komichi and Tino. My sense, 2013 up until today, we're still in elections mode. That's what has gripped the nation. That's what has kept us in this place. We are still focused on elections. And given the fact that, like Sipo was saying, that it's a winner take all, and it's a do or die, are we ever going to see us progressing to be dealing with those issues to do with Zimbabwe? Because we're at a place whereby, honestly, 2013 up until the elections of 2018, what dominated the headlines was the factionalism within ZANU. And what dominated the headlines from the opposition was the struggles within the MDC of succession and the splits that were happening in the MDC until the culmination of us having Nelson Chamisa. But we're still now, a couple of months later out of the 2018 elections, we're still in elections mode. We're still talking about elections. When are we going to see ourselves talking about issues beyond elections?
Okay, gentlemen, you've heard the questions. We'll start with Sipo, a response about the Rwanda.
Thank you very much. You know, students or scholars of conflict will relate to the fact that conflicts are ended in basically two ways. The first is the total defeat of one of the protagonists to the conflict. And the most enduring settlements of conflicts are those where you defeat your enemy thoroughly and totally. That is what settled the conflict in Sri Lanka. You know, the Tamil struggle. You remember there were many talks in Oslo and everywhere until the Senalese decided, you know, we're now going. And they routed and they totally destroyed the Tamils. And that ended the conflict. It might come up in some way, but that's the most definitive conclusion to any conflict. The second is a peace settlement, which is a dialogue, and a dialogue that results in compromise. So Rwanda, my sister, Rwanda was a total defeat by RPF of RDTL. They ran away to Congo and some of them to Belgium after massacring, you know, almost 1 million Tutsis and moderate Hutus. So Paul Kagame, he marched into an empty Kigali. So he didn't negotiate, he didn't have a conversation about what kind of political settlement. But the problems continue to bubble in Rwanda because the Hutus, a lot of them left. And there are many questions about the durability of Rwanda's political peace, if you can call it that. It's almost a fortress still, because there's a real sense of what's going to happen. If ever, since democracy is a game of numbers, and democracy has been tribalized, because politics has been ethnicized and ethnicity has been politicized, there is a fear that if you let numbers reign in a political process, the Hutus will win. Because the Hutus are more than the Tutsis. The Tutsis are only 7%. Now, Kagame, of course, has decided that I'm going to make the country so great for Hutus and Tutsis
in terms of services, in terms of everything else, that people will not miss a Hutu president. Of course, it doesn't change the fact that he's also maintained the military, securocratic way of running the country. He's a soldier. Kagame is a soldier. He's still a soldier. So it's a success in many ways and not so in others. And we need to nuance this. It's a functioning economy, and of course it's been the darling of Western funders as well. People are guilty about what they did to the Tutsis, and ignoring them and letting them be massacred and so on. But fundamentally, if things were allowed, and this is where I question our adherence to the winner-take-all political systems that we have. That's why I'm saying, I know my brother Tino says there's nothing to talk about. There's a lot to talk about. What's there to talk about? I'm not even talking about legitimacy, the election. What kind of political system do we want? That's something to talk about, where everybody feels included. Whether I'm a Karanga, I'm a Zozuru, I'm a Ndebele, whether I'm a worker, I'm a mother, whether I'm a young person, there's something to talk about. We can vision anew, which my brother Bayo was talking about. What kind of political system and how do we achieve it? So that's for me one point. The second question was, how do we get people involved? I think this animation we have decided to have about will there be a dialogue, will Nelson come, will, all what is happening. I think this is part of where we always lose the plot as civil society. When I say civil society, I don't mean civil society organizations. Civil society and civil society organizations are very different. Civil society is everyone. We are all part of civil society. Civil society organizations are organizations that might be formed to advance certain causes or certain issues. So as civil society, I said earlier, I have something to say. So we have to be thinking and not waiting for politicians to frame the dialogue. We also can say, we want to have our own conversations about what we would want in such a dialogue. So at what point, let's not wait. Why wait? I'm certain that my brother Munya has a lot to say about what kind of society he would want that's pro-worker, that's anti-neoliberal. Because if we're fashioning a new society, he should ideally, I'm sure he has those ideas, this is what I would want a dialogue to achieve. And then someone can put all those things together and conversations can happen ultimately, and some convergence can emerge over time. Not everybody will get what they want. Remember, in any negotiation, there are three possibilities. There's something you want, something you don't want, and something you might settle for. In any negotiation, when you're going to any negotiation, you know that I will not accept this. I want this, but I might settle for this. And where you settle depends on the negotiation. Thank you.
In the interest of time, gentlemen, I will plead with you to be as brief as possible. And if those who ask the questions don't feel that the responses were thorough enough, I invite you to ambush this gentleman and press for further clarification. Okay.
Thank you. I'm uncomfortable speaking while I'm sitting down. Elections, we are always in election mode. Are we ever going to see an end to this? As someone who loves this country, I would like to say yes, but the reality, unfortunately, is I don't think so. The reason for that is very simple. All this posturing about legitimacy, about the crisis of government, about a stolen election, is an election campaign for the MDC Congress. So the problem in the MDC is that the moment you say something that seems to agree with ZANU-PF or the government, you are labeled ZANU-PF. So Chesima Jome is now ZANU-PF, for example, because she did do what she did. But despite winning numerous awards as being a very good MP, My brother Gwisai supported the peasants taking their farms. Definitely ZANU-PF in people's eyes. So this is unfortunately the reality in the MDC. You speak to somebody at a debate with an MDC senior person on Voice of America, he said things that I thought were completely stupid. I can say this because I told him afterwards. I said, what's wrong with you? What you were saying is stupid. He says, no, your problem is that you thought you were debating with me, whereas I was talking to my constituents. If they had heard me agreeing with you, I would be in trouble. So you see, there is an election coming in May. They have to be saying these things. After May, they will probably try and frame the conversation around the election in 2023. So unfortunately, with the feeling that if we seek an accommodation with Mnangagwa, the 2.0 million votes that we got would desert us. So we need to keep them in the bag by continuing to say your vote was stolen. So unfortunately, until we have maturity and the responsibility in the opposition, the perpetual campaign mode will continue. I might not notice it, but I do not think that the people of ZANU-PF are in election mode. Certainly, I'm not yet running. Okay. It is very hard to respond to something which is a social media thing. Okay, which is a social media thing, but I will tell you this, that as one of the people who have said EDF 2023, some of us who have had conversations, unfortunately, with this man, have justifiable reasons sometimes to feel that he might do a Nelson Mandela and say, I will only do once. And it's necessary sometimes to tell some people, if you believe in them, that no, there is an expectation that you should be coming back. Not only is this good for us, but it's also, 30 seconds, it's also good for everyone because there is an incentive to fix this economy by 2023. There is no illusion that if things are not fixed economically, we might not get 2,460,010 votes. We might get less. But if somebody wants to come back again, and some of us want him to come back again, we will say EDF 2023, but that is not party policy. Whereas this one is party policy, because there's an announcement of legitimacy, there's a court case by an MDC person who challenged this policy. They refused to deny it in court papers, completely refused to deny that it is party policy. They decided to fudge and suggest that that case will be in court. By the way, we have read some of the papers. Hopefully they instruct me. That would be very good. But it's party policy, whereas this one is not. That would be the difference.
Okay. I'm going to thank and excuse my panel. And oh, yes. Oh, my God.
No, thank you, facilitator. I know you are impatient now. Time is gone, so I'll try to be very quick. The question that we are ever in the election mode is actually an indicator that we have got a crisis in this country. There's a conflict. There's a perpetual conflict and perpetual crisis in this country. So in conflicts, theoretically, they are resolved by leaders. Professor Mtambara yesterday said, be responsible, take accountability, provide solutions. From a simple definition of a leader, is the one who provides the vision, graphically, the one who sets goals, one who provides direction, one who provides solutions. So in every situation where you see a conflict taking place, let it be at home, at school, at companies, it is the head of that organization who is a failure, who is failing to take responsibility. Why you've seen Nelson providing the 5-point plan? He was providing leadership, which is sharing with all of you. He is shared with SADC. He is shared with the entire world, that we can resolve Zimbabwean problems if we follow the 5-point plan. He has not talked about GNU, No. He said if we deal with the legitimacy, we deal with the reforms, we deal with nation building, economic crisis agenda, if we deal with the international engagement, we'll resolve the Zimbabwean problem. So, he's very clear. So what I would want to ask my friend E.T. is to take that responsibility. He is currently the purported president. He must resolve the Zimbabwean problems. He should actually provide the challenge of perpetual election mode. It is a problem on its own, which requires leadership. In our proposal, we need a comprehensive dialogue so that we make sure that we put to an end that perpetual election mode. It must come to an end because we need to shift from the politics to the economy. But we cannot pull the economy if we do not correct the politics. Forget it. We are in a new world now. People are educated. These Zimbabweans know their rights, demand constitutionalism, demand good governance. They demand that. And we cannot do a shortcut to then go and deal with economic issues without providing a political environment which is conducive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Komichi. Yes, gentlemen, you are thanked and you're excused. Okay. So I owe Professor Yao, our next speaker, 30 minutes. So I will request your indulgence to please give him your undivided attention until 1:10. We'll break for lunch at 1:10. So please don't be looking at your watches, panicking, thinking we've forgotten that we're supposed to feed you. I will invite Professor Yao to come and take us on Lessons from Africa from the perspective of natural resource governance and poverty reduction. May I also request that if you have any questions, please be taking note of them. My fear is that over lunch you may enjoy the meal so much you may forget your questions. So if you take note of them, and then we'll get to the plenary session after lunch. Thank you, Professor. Just to give you a brief profile so you know the men who will be addressing us. Professor Yao Graham is the coordinator of Third World Network Africa, a Pan-African research and advocacy organization based in Accra, Ghana. He has good knowledge and experience of African and international development issues and processes from many years of work in various capacities. He holds a PhD in law from Warwick University, Coventry, UK. Yao Graham's current and recent institutional roles include serving as a member of Ghana's Environmental and Natural Resources Advisory Council, the Civil Society Advisory Committee to the UNDP Administrator, the International Study Group on Reform of Africa's Mining Regime set up by the UNECA and the African Union, and the Coordinating Committee of Social Watch, which is a global CSO coalition working for poverty reduction, eradication, and gender equality. He has also worked as a consultant for the African Union, for various UNAIDS entities, and he has co-edited Africa's Development Challenges in the New Millennium, which was published in 2006. He has done a whole lot more than that, but he is a very distinguished expert in his field, and I hope we'll give him our undivided attention. Over to you, Prof. Let me just vacate. Please take your full 30 minutes. We are ready to defer lunch for you.
Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, just a small clarification. You know, to the hardworking professors who wrote many papers to get their titles, I think I am not a professor, although people tend to make that mistake. I just want to clarify that. But let me express my thanks to the colleagues in Civil, Tendai and his team, for inviting me to speak in this meeting. I've been interested in Zimbabwe for a large part of my adult life. You know, when I was a student in the UK, we're all involved in the Zimbabwe support, you know, processes and the debates about, you know, the ZANU and ZAPU. Our friends were on different sides and so on, and I've continued to have many good friends in Zimbabwe. I've been asked to speak about natural resource governance frameworks, local content, tax justice in mining, and industrialization, lessons from Africa. That's a very big topic. I've decided, however, to add 2 issues which are relevant, which are dimensions of this, but which I think need to be taken additionally. That's the issue of artisanal and small-scale mining, which is important in the Zimbabwean context, and the issue of China's role, you know, in Africa's development, which comes up both around the question of local content and tax and industrialization. But I think it needs to be drawn out, you know, specifically. Like Bayo did, I will start my presentation with going back to the beginning of the post-colonial period. Because we know that in all our countries, in many African countries, mineral resources are very important because structurally, our countries are raw material commodity dependent. And particularly minerals, whether minerals or oil and gas, they're very important in our economies. Of course, this is part of the colonial legacy. The mineral economy tends to have very weak links with the rest of the national economies. The main local content being the labor input, you know, from locals who are employed. And the other linkage in terms of contribution is the revenue output, which is collected by the government for public expenditure. In many of our countries, however, the largest employment sector, subsector in mining, is the artisanal and small-scale mining sector. In terms of local content and local links with the rest of the economy, the artisanal and small-scale mining sector has more of a link because it employs a lot more people whose incomes are retained in the country. They support a large number of people and contribute to both domestic